Welcome to Sleepy Harbor. Settle in. Wherever you are right now, however you're lying, let the weight of the day begin to leave your shoulders. There is nothing you need to do for the next little while. Nothing to solve, nothing to remember, nowhere else to be. You can let your eyes close whenever they want to. You can let my voice do all the work. Tonight, we're going to drift slowly through one of the strangest, most ordinary things your body does. Something you'll do again in just a few hours, whether you mean to or not. We're going to talk, gently and without any hurry, about why we dream. Take a slow, deep breath in and let it go. Here is the thought I want to leave with you before sleep tonight, and I'll say it softly, because it's the kind of idea that's better received half awake. Every single night, the part of your brain whose entire job is to be sensible, to check the facts, to ask, wait, does this make sense? To keep you grounded in what's real. That part quietly switches itself off. Not because something has gone wrong. Not because you're tired in some failing way. It powers down on purpose. It's supposed to. And in the hours that follow, while that careful, skeptical fact-checking part of you sits in the dark, the rest of your mind throws open its doors and begins to play. That region has a long name, and I'll give it to you once, and then we'll keep it simple. It's called the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. Say it slowly in your head if you like. Dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. Though there will be no test, and you will not need to remember it, it sits up behind your forehead, toward the side, and you can think of it as the manager of your mind, the one with the clipboard, the one who keeps the meeting on track and says, let's stay focused, let's be logical, let's not say anything we can't back up. It handles working memory, the way you hold a phone number in your head for a few seconds. It handles self-monitoring, the quiet voice that checks your own behavior. And it handles reality testing, that constant, almost invisible process of comparing what's happening against what's possible, so you don't walk into traffic believing you can fly. And when you fall asleep and slip down into the deepest, dreamiest layer of the night, brain scans show that this manager, this dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, goes markedly quiet. The lights in that office dim, the clipboard is set down, the meeting goes on without a chair. Now here's the part I find tender, almost beautiful. And it's the thread that's going to run through everything tonight. It isn't that the whole brain goes quiet. It's that one part goes quiet, while another part lights up like a town at dusk. The very same scans that show the manager powering down show a cluster of much older, much more emotional regions waking up and running hot. There's the amygdala picture, a small almond-shaped piece deep in the brain, the part that handles fear and feeling, the part that flinches before you've even thought. It glows. There's the hippocampus, curled like a little seahorse, the part that files away your memories. It glows too. And there's a region called the anterior cingulate cortex, a strip that helps tie emotion to attention. It joins in. So while the careful manager sleeps at his desk, the feeling and memory engine room is fully staffed, fully lit, working through the night. Sit with that picture for a moment, because it's the whole story in miniature. Logic off, emotion and memory on. The critic asleep, the dreamer awake. And here is the gentle promise I want to make you for tonight. The reason I'm starting here, and not somewhere flashier. That single arrangement, that one switch flipping from day to night inside your skull, is going to explain nearly everything strange you have ever noticed about your own dreams. Why a dream feels so completely real while you're inside it, even when it's absurd. Why the scene can change from your childhood kitchen to the bottom of the ocean and you don't blink. Why your dreams are so often soaked in feeling. fear, longing, embarrassment, love. Why you so rarely move your body while it's all happening. And why the very moment you wake and reach for the dream, it slips through your fingers like water. All of it, from one switch, will come to each of those in turn slowly over the night. For now, just hold the image. The manager asleep, the engine room lit. Take another slow breath. There's no rush at all. To understand how anyone could possibly know what your brain is doing while you sleep, how we could map which rooms are lit and which are dark inside a dreaming head, we have to go back. Not far. To a basement laboratory at the University of Chicago in the year 1953. This is where the modern science of dreaming actually begins, and it begins, fittingly, with a tired graduate student watching someone sleep. The student was named Eugene Aserinsky. He was working under a physiologist called Nathaniel Kleitman, a careful, patient man who had spent much of his life studying sleep back when sleep was considered a rather unglamorous thing to study. A blank, a switching off, a nothing. The common belief at the time was that sleep was simply the absence of wakefulness. The brain, people assumed, more or less idled through the night, like a car left running quietly in a driveway. Dreams were thought to be brief flickers, oddities, hardly worth the instruments. Aserinsky was running long, dull nights of observation, and at one point, and I love that the story turns on something so domestic, he watched his own young son sleeping. He noticed something he wasn't expecting. Beneath the boy's closed eyelids, the eyes were moving. Not the slow, drifting roll you might imagine from a sleeper, but quick, darting, purposeful flicks, back and forth, side to side, as though the eyes were following something, watching something, as if behind those closed lids there were a film playing, and the eyes were tracking the action across an invisible screen. That observation could have been nothing. A twitch, a curiosity. But Aserinsky and Kleitman did the patient, unglamorous thing that turns a curiosity into a discovery. They hooked sleepers up to instruments and watched for those darting eye movements again and again, and crucially, they woke people up right in the middle of them. And when they did, the sleepers, blinking and groggy, told them the same astonishing thing over and over. They had been dreaming, vividly, in images and stories. The fast eye movements lined up night after night with the richest dreaming of all. They had found it. They gave it a plain descriptive name, the one we still use. Rapid eye movement sleep. REM, rapid eye movement, the phase of sleep in which the eyes dance beneath the lids and the mind fills with dreams. It sounds so simple now, almost obvious, the way all true things do once someone has finally pointed at them. But before that basement, before that darting-eyed little boy, nobody had drawn the line connecting those flickering eyes to the secret cinema running behind them. That moment in 1953 is, in a real sense, the founding event, the night the science of dreaming was born. Let that settle. Somewhere in a quiet building, a tired man watched his sleeping child's eyes move, and the whole hidden country of the dreaming brain opened up. Now, once they could find REM sleep reliably with their instruments, the researchers noticed something even stranger about it, something that earned it a second, almost poetic name. When you measure the brain's electrical activity, you do it with a device that reads the faint waves of electricity rippling across the surface of the brain. The reading is called an EEG, and you don't need to picture anything more than a pen tracing wavy lines across a moving strip of paper, the way a seismograph traces the small trembles of the earth. When you're deeply, dreamlessly asleep in the heavy early part of the night, those waves are big and slow and rolling, long, lazy swells like a calm sea with very long distances between each gentle rise. That's the brain resting in its deepest gear. But when a sleeper slid into REM, the pen began to scribble fast. The waves went small and quick and irregular, short, choppy, busy little waves. And here's the thing that stopped the researchers. Those fast, busy, scribbling waves looked almost exactly like the waves of a brain that is wide awake. If you covered up the labels and just showed someone the tracing, they couldn't easily tell whether the person was alert with their eyes open or fast asleep and dreaming. The brain, electrically, looked awake, and yet the body was anything but. The very same person whose brain was buzzing with waking-like activity lay completely still, limp. The muscles slack, the limbs heavy, the whole body soft and unmoving on the bed. A brain that looks awake, riding inside a body that has gone utterly quiet. That contradiction was so striking that researchers gave REM sleep its second name, the one that captures the paradox at its heart. They called it paradoxical sleep. Paradoxical because of the riddle of it. The mind running, the body resting, the lights on upstairs, the house silent and still. Breathe slowly. There's something soothing in that image, isn't there? Your body laid down to rest, deeply and completely safe, while your mind goes wandering on its own. But this stillness of the body isn't an accident, and it isn't just the natural slackness of being relaxed. It's something your brain does to you on purpose every single time you dream, and it does it for a very good reason. There's a name for it: REM atonia. Atonia simply means without tone, without tension. The muscles going truly, profoundly limp. And it isn't a fading, it's an active command. Deep in the most ancient part of your brain, down in the brain's stem. Picture the thick stalk where the brain meets the top of the spinal cord, the oldest, most automatic machinery you have, the part that keeps your heart beating and your lungs breathing without your ever thinking about it. Down there, in regions called the pons and the medulla, a circuit switches on the moment you enter a dream. What that circuit does is send a steady signal down to the motor neurons, the nerve cells, that would normally pass your brain's movement commands along to your muscles, and the signal it sends is an inhibiting one, a quieting one. It uses chemical messengers, and you can simply think of them as the brain's hush chemicals. Their names are glycine and GABA, and all you need to picture is a soft hand laid gently over the controls. While you dream, those hush chemicals hold your muscles still. So even when, inside the dream, you are running flat out across a field or climbing a staircase or reaching for someone or fleeing something, your brain is firing all the commands to move, but the messages are being intercepted before they ever reach your arms and legs, caught at the gate, held softly down. And think about how kind that is. Think about why a body would evolve to do such a thing. Because the dreaming brain, with its manager asleep, genuinely believes its own stories. If your muscles were free, you would act every one of them out. You would thrash and run and swing and leap in the dark, in your bed with your eyes closed and no idea where the furniture is or where the edge of the bed lies. REM atonia is your brain tucking you in. It's the system that lets the mind run wild all night while the body stays exactly where it's safe, flat, warm, unmoving, held still by a soft chemical hand so that you can dream the wildest things and wake up in the morning without a scratch. There are, the researchers noticed, two small exceptions to this paralysis. Two parts that stay free to move. One is the diaphragm, the broad muscle beneath your lungs that pulls your breath in and out. That one, of course, can never be allowed to stop, and so it keeps working all night long, steady and faithful, the soft tide of your breathing carrying you through the dark. And the other exception, well, the other is the eyes. The eyes are not held down, the eyes are left free. which is exactly why Eugene Aserinsky could see them all those years ago darting beneath his sleeping son's lids. The one part of the dreamer still allowed to move, tracking the images of a film no one else could see. Hold on to that little detail about the eyes being free. It's going to matter much later in the night in a way you won't expect. There are scientists who have used those two free-moving eyes to do something that sounds, frankly, impossible. But that's for later. Let it rest for now. So this is the ordinary nightly miracle, the brain looking awake, the body lying still by command, the eyes flicking under the lids while a whole hidden world plays out behind them. For most of us, every night of our lives, the system works perfectly. The hush chemicals do their gentle job, the body stays put, and we dream our dreams and wake without ever knowing how carefully we were held. But not for everyone. And here is where I want to slow down and tell you something that is, in its quiet way, one of the most extraordinary things in all of dream science. And I want to be very careful and very gentle with how I say it, because it's also tender, and it touches on health, and I don't want it to land heavily on you as you drift. In some people, that soft, restraining hand fails to hold. The brainstem circuit doesn't lay the muscles down the way it should. The hush chemicals don't quite reach the gate, and so while these people are deep in a dream, their bodies are free to move. And they act the dream out. There's a name for this too, REM sleep behavior disorder, often shortened simply to RBD. And what it looks like can be startling. People with it have been known to punch, to kick, to shout, to thrash their arms, to grab, to run, even to leap clean out of bed, all while sound asleep, all while their eyes are closed and the dream is still playing. They're not awake, they're not aware. The dream has simply broken through the wall that should have contained it, and the body is doing what the dreaming mind told it to do. Often the dream behind it is one of defense, fighting off an attacker, fleeing a threat, and the sleeper's partner is the one who notices first, woken by the sudden movement beside them in the dark. It can be alarming. It can lead to bruises, to falls. But here is the thing that has astonished sleep researchers and made them watch RBD very closely, and I'll say it plainly and softly. For a large fraction of people who develop this disorder later in life, it turns out to be an early signal, a quiet, advance flag, of something arriving in the body that won't reveal itself for years yet. Many people with RBD go on later to develop Parkinson's disease or a related condition in that same family, and not soon, sometimes a decade or more later. The acting out of dreams can show up 10 years, even more, before any of the movement symptoms that doctors usually associate with Parkinson's ever appear. Now, I want to hold this carefully for you because the careful truth is the kinder one, and it's also the more accurate one. RBD does not cause Parkinson's. Acting out your dreams does not give you a disease. This is not a thing to lie here and worry over. What scientists have found is an association, a link, a marker, a kind of early weather sign. The same deep brainstem machinery that lays your muscles down at night is, it seems, among the very first regions touched by certain slow changes in the brain. And so a disturbance there can ring like a distant bell long before anything else does. It's a clue read backward by careful doctors. It's the brain, in a sense, leaving a quiet note years in advance. And understanding that has become its own gift because it gives researchers a precious early window, chance to study, to watch, to perhaps one day intervene long before the obvious signs arrive. So let it be, for tonight, simply a marvel, a measure of how deep and how ancient and how interconnected this dreaming machinery really is, that a flicker in the night could carry a message about a decade still to come. Breathe. Let that go gently. It is, for almost everyone listening, simply a fascinating fact about other people's brains and nothing more. Your own soft hush chemicals are doing their faithful work right now, laying you down, keeping you safe and still. There's one more thing I want to give you before we let this first stretch of the night close, and it's a correction. A gentle overturning of something almost everyone believes, including, until fairly recently, a great many scientists. And I love handing these over because they're the kind of fact that quietly rearranges your sense of what's going on inside your own head. You've probably absorbed somewhere along the way the tidy little equation that REM sleep equals dreaming, and that the rest of sleep, the deep, slow, non-dreaming part, is simply blank. Lights out, nothing there, it's a clean idea. REM is the dream phase, the other phases are the empty phases, and that's that. And given how perfectly Aserinsky and Kleitman's darting eyes lined up with vivid dreams, you can see exactly why everyone came to believe it. But it isn't quite true, and the way they found out is wonderfully simple, and they just kept waking people up, not only during REM, but during every stage of sleep, including the deep, slow, non-REM phases, all down in what's called NREM sleep, simply not REM, the heavy, quiet gears of the night. They'd wake someone gently out of that deep, supposedly blank sleep and ask, very plainly, "Was anything going through your mind just then?" And again, people said yes. There was something. Not nothing, something. So it turns out we dream, or at least the mind keeps producing something, outside of REM too. Dreaming is not the exclusive property of that one paradoxical phase. The whole sleeping night, it seems, has an inner life of some kind humming along inside it. But, and this is the lovely, telling part, what people report from those deep non-REM phases is different. It has a different flavor, a different texture. The dreams of REM are the ones you know best. The vivid, moving, story-driven, often bizarre adventures, full of images and feeling, the ones that play like films behind your darting eyes. But the experiences people report from NREM sleep tend to be quieter, plainer, more still, more thought-like than film-like, less a wild story, more a single lingering idea or a static image or the faint sense of having been turning something over. Less strange, less dramatic, less of a journey. A thought sitting quietly in the dark rather than a whole world unspooling. And isn't that a gentle thing to know as you lie here tonight? That even in your very deepest, heaviest sleep, the part of you that thinks and feels and pictures never quite goes fully dark. That all through the night, in different rooms and different registers, your mind keeps a soft light burning. Sometimes it's the wild cinema of REM, with the manager asleep and the engine room blazing. And sometimes it's only a quiet thought, drifting through the deep like a single boat crossing a still harbor in the dark. Hold that picture as we move on, because we still have so much of the night ahead of us and so much left to understand. We've found our switch, the manager asleep, the engine room lit. We've found where it all began, in a basement in Chicago, with a sleeping boy's flickering eyes. We've learned why your body lies so still, held down by a soft and ancient hand, and what happens, rarely, when that hand fails. And we've learned that the dreaming never truly stops, not even in the deepest dark. But we still haven't asked the most interesting questions of all. Where do the images themselves actually come from? If not from your eyes, then from where? Why do dreams feel so utterly real while they last? Why is the most common dream on earth not flying, not falling in love, but some version of being chased? And why does the whole shimmering world of a dream vanish the very instant you wake and try to hold it? We're going to follow each of those questions slowly into the deeper dark. But not yet. For now, just keep breathing, slow and easy. The manager is asleep. The engine room is warm and lit. And there is so much more still to come, drifting toward us through the quiet. Let us pause here for a moment before we go any deeper, Take a slow, deep breath. Feel the weight of your body against the bed, the small warmth where your hands rest. Notice how quiet it has become. There is nothing you need to do with any of this, nothing to memorize, nothing to solve tonight. You are simply here in the dark, being told a true story about the strangest few hours of your own life. When you are ready, we will continue together. Let us go back, just for a little while, to that basement room in Chicago. Eugene Aserinsky, a graduate student, tired, underfunded, watching a machine scratch its slow lines onto a moving roll of paper. He had wired up a sleeper and waited, and in the small hours the pens began to jump. Fast, sharp strokes, the kind he'd expect from someone wide awake and alert. He thought at first that the machine had broken, that something had come loose. He checked the wires, he checked the sleeper. The body was still. The breathing was slow. The person was, by every outward sign, deeply, peacefully asleep. But the pens kept leaping, and under the closed lids the eyes were darting back and forth, quick and purposeful, as though watching something, as though following something across a screen that wasn't there. Sit with how strange that must have felt. A still body, a racing brain, the outward calm of deep sleep, and underneath it, this hidden storm of activity that no one had ever really looked at before. Aserinsky and his teacher, Nathaniel Kleitman, kept watching night after night. And when they woke their sleepers in those flickering-eyed moments, the sleepers told them stories, vivid ones, worlds they had been living in just seconds before. They had found the door into the dreaming mind. And what they found behind it was a paradox so clean it almost sounds invented. They called it paradoxical sleep, and the name is exactly right. Because if you looked only at the brain's electrical signature in those moments, those fast, low, restless waves, you would swear the person was awake, up and about, thinking, planning, moving through the day. The waves of REM and the waves of waking look very nearly the same, and yet the body in those very same moments is paralyzed, almost completely, not resting, not merely relaxed, held, pinned down on purpose by the brain itself. Let us explore why. Down at the base of your skull, where the brain narrows and becomes the cord that runs down your spine, there is a small, ancient region, the brainstem, made of parts with old and lovely names, the pons and the medulla. And every time you slip into REM, this old machinery does something quietly remarkable. It reaches down the long wires that lead to your muscles, and it switches them off. It floods them with messengers, glycine, GABA, the brain's great quieters. One by one, your arms, your legs, your hands, your whole acting, moving body goes soft and unresponsive, limp as a sleeping cat. This is called REM atonia, the deep stillness of the dreaming body. Think about what that means and how wise it is. Up in the engine room, your mind is running at full pitch. It is climbing stairs, opening doors, reaching out, running, falling, fighting, flying. It believes completely that it is doing all of these things. And if that belief were allowed to reach your muscles, you would do them. You would leap from the bed and run into the wall. You would throw the punch you are throwing in the dream. So the old brainstem, in its mercy, cuts the line. It lets your mind go anywhere it likes, run as wild as it wants, precisely because it has made sure your body cannot follow. The dream is given its freedom only because the body has been made safe. There are just two exceptions it leaves untouched. The small muscles that move the eyes, which is why those eyes go flickering, and the steady breath that keeps you alive. Everything else, it stills, It is a beautiful arrangement when it works, a soft and ancient hand laid gently over the sleeper all night long, but now and then that hand fails. And here we touch one of the strangest and most important threads in this whole story, so let us walk it slowly. There are people for whom the paralysis simply does not come. The mind dreams, the engine room blazes, but the line to the muscles was never cut. And so they act it out, fully, physically. They punch at things that are not there. They kick, they shout, they run. Some have leapt clean out of bed and across the room, still deep inside a dream they will not even remember in the morning. This is called REM sleep behavior disorder, and to watch it is to watch a dream escape its cage and spill out into the waking world. And here is the part that asks us to be careful and tender at once. For many of the people who develop this, not all but a striking number, that thrashing, dream-acting sleep turns out to be something more than a sleep problem. It turns out to be an early signal, a faint light on the far horizon, because a large share of people with this disorder will many years later, sometimes a full decade or more, go on to develop Parkinson's disease or one of its close relatives. The restless dreaming comes first, the tremor comes after, long after, when no one is watching for it yet. Let us be precise and gentle about what that means, because it matters. The dreaming does not cause the illness. It is not a curse or a sentence. It is more like a window, a place where something quietly changing deep in the brain happens to show itself early, in the one room where the body is meant to lie still and doesn't. It is the body whispering years ahead in the only language it has at night. And researchers have learned to listen to that whisper because a warning given 10 years early is a rare and precious thing in medicine. There is something almost moving in it, that the dreaming self, the part of us we understand the least, should be the part that speaks up first and earliest on our behalf. You do not need to carry any worry from this into your night. Almost everyone who turns and twitches a little in their sleep is perfectly, ordinarily fine. This is a particular and uncommon thing, and the point of it for us is simply how much the dreaming state is woven into the deep machinery of being alive. It is not a froth on the surface of sleep. It is wired into the oldest parts of us, kept safe by old hands and connected in ways we are only beginning to map to the long story of a whole life and a whole brain. And there is one more thing to set down before we drift further, because it overturns something almost everyone believes. We have spoken of REM as though it were the only place dreams live, the flickering eyes, the blazing engine room, but it isn't so. When researchers gently woke sleepers from the other kind of sleep, the deep, slow, quiet kind, far from any darting eyes, those sleepers too often had something to report. Not the wild cinema of REM, something softer, more like a thought than a film, a still image, a single idea turning over slowly in the dark, a mood with no story attached. So dreaming is not one country with one border. It is a whole landscape with weather that changes from room to room of the night. The roaring storm of REM in one place, and elsewhere, in the deep, a quiet drifting thought crossing a still water. The light never fully goes out. It only changes its color. Breathe with that for a moment. The eyes that started it all, flickering in a Chicago basement. The soft hand that holds your body still so your mind can roam. The dream that sometimes slips its cage and whispers years early on your behalf. And the quiet, thought-like dreaming that goes on even in the deepest dark where no one ever thought to look. We have our map beginning to take shape now, but the deepest questions are still ahead of us, waiting in the dark, and we will reach them gently, one by one. So let us go a little deeper now into the wiring itself. Because the question most people never think to ask is not just that the brain keeps working during sleep. The question is, which parts of it wake up and which parts go quiet? And the answer to that is stranger than almost anything else the brain does. Think of it this way. You have a control room inside your head. It sits just behind your forehead, a little to the left and right. And it is the part of you that says, wait, that doesn't add up. It is the part that checks your own thinking, that holds the thread of an argument long enough to test it, that catches you when you're about to believe something absurd. Logicians call it executive function. Neuroscientists have a name for the territory that houses it: the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, a long name for a quiet and essential thing. During the waking hours, this region is almost always running. When you read a sentence and notice that something is off, when you count your change and realize the total is wrong. When someone tells you a story and a small voice in you says, "I'm not sure that's right," that is the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex doing its steady, unglamorous work. During REM sleep, it goes dark. Not dim, not drowsy, dark. Imaging studies, the kind where a person sleeps inside a large and quietly humming scanner while their brain is measured, show a marked and consistent deactivation of this region during the dreaming state. Pierre Mackay at the University of Liège and Alan Braun at the National Institutes of Health, working through the late 1990s and into the early 2000s, helped map what was happening in the sleeping brain with a precision that simply hadn't been possible before. What they found was not a uniformly quiet brain, which is what you might expect of sleep. What they found was a brain reorganized. Certain regions dimmed, others lit up brighter than they do in ordinary waking life. The amygdala, which you might think of as the brain's alarm bell, its threat detector, its chamber of feeling, became more active. The hippocampus, the great archivist that holds and sorts and recalls memory, hummed with unusual intensity. The anterior cingulate cortex, a region involved in emotional processing and in the messy work of navigating conflict, stayed warm and busy. The emotional and memory core of the brain, in other words, was running hot, lit from within. And the part responsible for checking all of it against reality had stepped away from its post. This is not a small thing. This is, in a very real sense, the entire explanation for what dreaming feels like. Hold that image. The guard has left, and the prisoners are dancing. The quality control officer has gone home for the night, and the factory floor is doing whatever it likes. When you dream that you are in your childhood house, but the rooms are wrong, and then suddenly you are at work, but your old school desk is there, and the person beside you has the face of someone you haven't seen in 20 years, and none of this surprises you at all. The reason you don't notice the impossibility is not that you have lost your intelligence. It is that the very mechanism you would normally use to flag impossibility is offline. There is no one to raise an objection. The dreaming brain accepts whatever it is given because the part that would say, "No, wait, that's not right," has gone quiet for the night. And what is giving it material? What is being presented for acceptance? Here is where the wiring becomes genuinely beautiful and genuinely strange. When you are awake and you see the world, the process begins at the eyes. Light falls on the retina, signals travel along the optic nerve, and the earliest cortical destination is the primary visual cortex, tucked at the very back of the brain, V1 in the shorthand. From V1, signals move forward into the higher visual areas, the visual association cortex, where raw signals become recognizable objects, coherent scenes, the world as you know it. During REM sleep, the eyes are darting behind closed lids, but they aren't actually feeding information to V1 in the normal way. The primary visual cortex, that first relay station from the external world, is relatively quiet, and yet the higher visual areas, the visual association cortex, further forward, are active, humming, working. What this means is that the dream's imagery is being generated not from the outside in, but from the inside out, top down. The brain is taking its stored representations, its library of faces and places and remembered sensations, and projecting them inward, playing them on a private screen that the eyes have nothing to do with. Your dreaming visual system is a projector running from its own archive, with the camera pointed at the wall and all the windows blocked. The philosopher might call it a closed system of meaning. The neuroscientist might say the brain is hallucinating, using that word precisely as a technical description, not a metaphor. A hallucination is a perception generated internally rather than by external stimulus. Every dream you have ever had has been, in this exact and clinical sense, a hallucination. Vivid, textured, convincing to the perceiver in the moment, and entirely generated by the dreaming brain from its own accumulated material. This is why the people you meet in dreams feel present, why the places feel solid beneath your feet, why the emotion is real, because the machinery generating it is the same machinery that generates perception in waking life. The difference is only the source. In waking life, the world provides the data. In dreaming, the brain consults itself. But what decides what gets projected, what selects the material? This is where the brain stem enters the story, with something called the PGO wave, ponto-geniculo-occipital. 3 stations in the chain. The pons, that ancient brainstem structure from part 1 of our journey tonight, fires a burst of electrical activity. It sweeps forward and upward to the lateral geniculate nucleus in the thalamus, the brain's great relay hub, and then onward to the occipital cortex at the back of the brain. These waves, which can be measured in animals with implanted electrodes and inferred in humans from indirect measures, fire in rhythmic bursts throughout REM sleep. They are the brainstem's signal, an insistent pulse that arrives in the visual and limbic systems like a stone thrown into water. Think of someone tapping randomly on the keys of an organ. Each tap produces a note. The notes are not a song. They are not arranged by intention. But if you sat beside the organ and someone asked you what was being played and you couldn't see the random tapper, you might try to hear a melody anyway. Because hearing a melody is what you do. Imposing order on sound is what the brain does. That, in a simplified form, is the first and most striking idea behind the activation synthesis hypothesis. In 1977, 2 researchers at Harvard Medical School published a paper in the American Journal of Psychiatry that challenged, in a direct and unambiguous way, a model that had dominated the study of dreams for most of the 20th century. Alan Hobson and Robert McCarley were neuroscientists, and they came to the question of dreams not through the couch and the consulting room, but through the lab, through physiology, through the brainstem's own electrical life. Their argument was this: dreams begin not in the unconscious mind, not in the reservoir of hidden wish or unresolved longing, but in the pons, the brainstem fires. PGO waves sweep upward, arriving in the forebrain as something like random noise, a chaotic spray of electrical signal. And the forebrain, being a system evolved over millions of years to construct meaning and narrative from whatever arrives, does what it always does. It synthesizes, it makes a story. It takes the noise and builds it into something that has, or almost has, the structure of experience. Activation, the random brainstem firing. Synthesis, the forebrain's narrative construction. The dream on this account is the product of the synthesis step. It is the brain explaining itself to itself, making the best sense it can of signals it didn't choose. Hobson and McCarley were writing explicitly against Freud. Sigmund Freud's great work, The Interpretation of Dreams, published at the very turn of the 20th century, had proposed that the dream was a disguised fulfillment of a repressed wish. The manifest content, what you actually saw, and experienced in the dream was a coded version of a latent meaning that the unconscious had dressed up so the sleeping mind would not be disturbed by it. The dream work involved processes Freud called condensation, where multiple ideas were compressed into a single image, and displacement, where emotional weight was shifted from its true object onto a proxy. The bizarre, jumbled quality of dreams was, on Freud's account, not an accident, but a deliberate obscuring, a censor at work. For decades, this was the operating framework, not just in psychoanalysis, but in culture at large. Dreams were messages. They needed decoding. The strange surface was a veil. Hobson and Macaulay offered something entirely different. The strange surface, they said, was not a veil. It was the product of a noisy signal being processed by a brain that didn't have all its faculties online. The bizarreness was not meaningful concealment. It was what happened when a sophisticated narrative system was handed incoherent input and asked to make something of it. This was a significant claim, and it was not warmly received in all quarters. But it shifted the field. And yet the story does not end there, because Hobson himself did not hold to the starkest version of his own idea. By 2009, he had substantially refined his position. In later work, he proposed what he called the AIM model, and then something he described as a proto-consciousness hypothesis. The argument evolved. He came to see REM dreaming less as the brain generating essentially meaningless noise, and more as something genuinely generative, a kind of virtual reality rehearsal that the brain uses to build and maintain the very capacity for consciousness. Particularly in the developing brain, the young brain, Hobson argued that REM sleep and its dreaming state might play a foundational role in establishing how the mind will come to experience the world. The random firing in this view was not purely random, or rather, even if the initial signal was random, what the brain built from it over time was anything but. So even the man who most forcefully challenged the idea that dreams were meaningful ended up, in his later years, arguing that dreaming served a deep and important function. Not wish fulfillment, not symbolic coding, but something closer to an ongoing biological rehearsal, a kind of nightly maintenance of the dreaming mind itself. We will come back to what that function might be. For now, let us settle into the chemistry, because underlying all of this, beneath the imaging maps and the brainstem waves and the quiet prefrontal cortex, there is a chemistry, a specific and measurable shift in the balance of the brain's signaling molecules that happens at the transition into REM and sustains itself throughout it. The brain uses different chemicals to regulate different states. In waking life, two of the great stabilizers of mood and attention are serotonin and noradrenaline. You may know noradrenaline by its other name, norepinephrine. It is closely related to adrenaline, and while adrenaline surges in the body in moments of acute stress, noradrenaline does something more continuous and quieter in the brain. It helps regulate alertness, attention, the encoding of memory. It keeps things sharp. It is part of the mechanism by which emotionally significant events get written into long-term storage. When something frightening or wonderful happens, noradrenaline rises and the brain writes it down. During REM sleep, the neurons that produce noradrenaline go almost completely silent. Not reduced, almost silent. The same happens to the neurons producing serotonin. These aminergic systems, as they are called, essentially cease their broadcasting. At the same time, acetylcholine rises. This is a different kind of signal. If noradrenaline and serotonin are the chemicals of sharp, focused, emotionally anchored attention, acetylcholine is the chemical of loose, flowing, associative connection. It promotes the kind of mental movement that skips from one thing to another, that finds links between distant ideas, that follows a thread without insisting it stay straight. High acetylcholine, low noradrenaline, low serotonin. This is the chemical recipe for the dreaming brain, and once you see it, a number of things become much clearer. The emotional intensity of dreams, the amygdala is running hot, and the chemical check that normally moderates its output is reduced. There is less restraint. The strange associativeness, the way a dream can leap from a kitchen to a beach to a corridor from childhood without any logical bridge, and the dream mind accepts all of it without protest. That is loose, acetylcholine-driven association operating in the absence of the serotonin and noradrenaline that would normally keep attention focused and sequential. And then the forgetting. We will come back to this in more detail, but already you can see the shape of it. Noradrenaline is part of how memories are encoded, how experiences are written into long-term storage. And noradrenaline is precisely what REM turns off. The brain is, in a very literal chemical sense, in a state that is not designed to make lasting records. You forget your dreams partly because the pencil has been put down, the recording light is off. The mechanism that would normally say, "This matters, write it down," is quiet for the night. Hold that thread, we will come back to pull it fully. For now, rest in the picture of the dreaming brain as it actually is. Not a passive thing, slipping down into dark. A brain reorganized, specific systems dimmed with intention, specific systems brightened. The emotional core awake, the logical guardian asleep, the visual system hallucinating from the inside. The chemistry tilted toward loose association and away from careful recording. PGO waves arriving from the brainstem like dispatches from an old and wordless place, and the forebrain building rooms from them, building hallways, building faces, building the sensation of running and not being able to run fast enough. And all of this happening every night, in the last hours before morning, while you are completely unaware that it is happening at all. Take a slow breath now. Feel the surface beneath you, the small sounds of the room around you. This is what is going on, just underneath the ordinary surface of sleep. The most sophisticated organ in the known universe, quietly reorganizing itself in the dark. When you are ready, we will continue. There is a question that remains open even after all of that. The question of what this state is for. Because knowing how the dreaming brain works is one kind of answer. But the deeper question, the one that tugs at us even now, is why? Why this elaborate state? Why the paralysis, the hallucination, the chemical restructuring? What is the dreaming brain doing with all of that? This is where the theories begin, and they are not small or idle. They are serious proposals grounded in real evidence, made by researchers who spent decades looking closely at what dreams contain and what function they serve. Let us start with the one that addresses the most common dream in the world. If you ask people across cultures, across languages, across very different circumstances of life what they most often dream, a pattern emerges that is consistent enough to be called universal. Not flying, though that is common, not falling, though that is common too. The most widespread, most frequently reported dream experience on Earth is some version of being chased, being hunted, being pursued by something you cannot see clearly or can see and wish you couldn't, running and not escaping, being caught, being in danger. Why? Why should the sleeping brain in all its strange freedom return again and again to that particular experience? The brain could, in principle, dream of anything at all. Why does it so consistently choose threat? Antti Revonsuo, a cognitive neuroscientist based in Finland, proposed an answer in the year 2000 in a paper published in the journal Behavioral and Brain Sciences. He called it the threat simulation theory. His argument, at its core, was evolutionary. Consider what life was like for the vast majority of human history, not in cities, not with the protections of modern infrastructure, but in conditions where genuine physical threat was a constant feature of the environment, where predators were real, where rival groups were real, where the wrong path through the dark could be the last one. In those conditions, the capacity to recognize a threat quickly and to respond to it effectively was not an optional enhancement. It was survival. Revonsuo's proposal was that dreaming is an evolved biological mechanism for rehearsing exactly that. While the body lies safe, while no real danger is present, the dreaming brain runs simulations. It generates threats. It practices the experience of being in danger. And in doing so, it trains the systems that would need to respond if the danger were real. Not the muscles, which are paralyzed, but the emotional and perceptual systems that first detect and recognize threat. The alarm networks, the fear response, the orientation toward danger. Think of it as a flight simulator. A pilot learning to fly doesn't begin by flying in real emergencies. They sit in a simulator that generates the experience of emergency, the instruments failing, the weather closing in, the unexpected warning. And by repeatedly experiencing these simulated crises, the pilot's nervous system becomes trained to respond quickly, reliably, correctly when the real thing arrives, not because they thought their way through it in advance, but because they practiced the felt experience. Revonsuo's claim was that dreaming serves an equivalent function. The most common dream is threat not because the dreamer is anxious or neurotic or repressing something. It is threat because that is what the threat simulation system is designed to generate. That is its job. And the evidence for this comes from content analysis. Researchers have examined large collections of dream reports drawn from thousands of people over many years, and the pattern is consistent. Threatening events appear in dreams far more often than they appear in waking life. Aggressive and threatening interactions are dramatically overrepresented relative to friendly or neutral ones. And when threatening events occur in dreams, the dreamer is more often the target than the aggressor. You are being chased more often than you are doing the chasing. You are being attacked more often than you are attacking. The dreamer, in the statistics of dream content, is reliably the one in danger. This is not what you would expect from random noise. If dreams were simply the brain synthesizing whatever happened to come up, you would expect the emotional balance of dreams to roughly mirror the emotional balance of waking life. And it doesn't. The threat is disproportionate. And the evidence suggests the disproportionate presence of threat is a feature, not a bug. There is further evidence from a striking direction. Researchers studied children who had been exposed to genuinely dangerous real-world environments, children living through or in the aftermath of situations of real threat, and compared their dream content to children who had not had those experiences. The children in genuinely threatening environments showed significantly more threat simulation content in their dreams. Their dreaming systems had, apparently, ramped up the rehearsal in response to the real danger in their waking world, as if the threat simulation engine had received updated information and was running extra cycles. This fits the theory. If dreaming is a rehearsal system, it should be sensitive to how dangerous the waking environment is, and it appears to be. Revonsuo and his colleagues, including Katja Valli and Pillarine Sicker and others who extended this work, also proposed what they called the social simulation theory, published around 2015. The idea here was that dreaming does not only rehearse physical threat, but also rehearses the complex terrain of social interaction. The intricate, high-stakes landscape of other people, who is an ally, who is a rival, how to read an expression, how to navigate conflict, how to maintain the bonds that make cooperation possible. Human social life is not simple, and getting it wrong has real consequences. Perhaps the dreaming mind is also running social simulations, practicing the felt experience of being in relationship, of navigating status and trust and rejection and belonging. This extension has less empirical weight behind it than the core threat simulation account, but it points towards something important. Dreams are full of other people. The characters who populate our dreams, who show up uninvited, who play roles that shift without warning, are in large part the social world internalized. We practice that world too in the dark. And here, in the dreaming state's strange generosity toward threat, we find a bridge to something else. Because the dream does not just simulate threat, it simulates emotion. It does something with the emotions that are already there, carried from waking into sleep, and it does something to them, something that, when the system works, leaves us in a different relationship to those feelings come morning. Matthew Walker, a neuroscientist whose work on sleep has been particularly focused on the emotional dimension of what the sleeping brain does, advanced a hypothesis that the emotional processing research community has spent considerable effort examining. He called it, in a phrase that is simple enough to stick, overnight therapy. The idea is this: when you have an emotionally charged experience, something frightening, something painful, something that leaves a mark, the memory of that experience is stored in the brain with its emotional weight attached. The facts of what happened and the feeling of what happened are bound together. That binding is useful. It is what makes you remember the dangerous thing, what makes you cautious, what gives experience its power to teach. But the binding can also keep the emotional charge too live, too ready to fire, too easily triggered by reminders. Trauma is, in its essence, a memory that has not shed its original emotional heat. Walker's hypothesis was that REM sleep is the time when the brain attempts to do this shedding, to take the emotional memory and process it in a way that preserves the information, what happened, while gradually reducing the rawness of the emotional charge attached to it. You wake up still knowing what happened, but ideally, over nights of successful REM sleep, knowing it with slightly less immediate pain. The wound is there, but it has begun to scar over. The proposed mechanism ties back to the chemistry we established earlier. Remember that during REM, noradrenaline goes nearly silent. And noradrenaline is the stress chemical, the molecule of alarm and urgency and emotional intensity. In a brain low on noradrenaline, emotional memories can be reactivated and processed in what Walker describes as a safe neurochemical environment. The memory comes back up, the networks associated with it fire, but without the original accompanying surge of the stress signal. And that processing, repeated night after night, may gradually decondition the emotional charge. Like learning to hold a memory without the fire, there is experimental evidence that points toward this. In studies where subjects were shown emotionally charged images and then either slept normally, with REM, or were kept awake through the night before being shown the images again, those who had slept showed reduced reactivity in the amygdala on the second viewing. The alarm bell was quieter. They also reported finding the images less distressing on re-exposure. Sleep had done something, not erased the memory, not pretended the image had no content, but taken some of the sting out of it. And then consider the condition where this process fails. Post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, is characterized by many things, but among the most consistent is disturbed REM sleep, and in particular the phenomenon of nightmares, vivid, terrifying dreams that replay the traumatic experience or variations of it with undiminished emotional force. If the overnight therapy is working, the dream processes the emotional memory and gradually reduces its charge. In PTSD, something appears to go wrong in that process. The dreaming brain keeps returning to the traumatic material, keeps reactivating it, but the diffusing doesn't happen. The memory is replayed but not discharged. The file is reopened but never closed. One thread of evidence here involves a drug called prazosin. Prazosin is an alpha blocker, a medication originally developed for blood pressure that has been used clinically in some cases to reduce the severity and frequency of PTSD nightmares. The reason it is relevant here is mechanistic. Prazosin works in part by reducing noradrenergic signaling, by quieting the noradrenaline system. If nightmares in PTSD are partly a consequence of elevated or dysregulated noradrenaline during REM, If the chemical environment of sleep is not low enough in that stress signal to allow the diffusing to occur, then a drug that reduces noradrenaline might help restore something closer to the conditions under which emotional processing can proceed. The efficacy evidence for prazosin is mixed across clinical trials. It is not a clean, established cure, and it is not presented here as one. But the mechanistic rationale is coherent and consistent with what we know about REM neurochemistry. It is the right thread to pull, and it tells us that the chemistry of the dreaming state is not incidental to what dreaming does. The chemistry is the mechanism. The specific cocktail of low noradrenaline, low serotonin, high acetylcholine that is not just the environment in which dreaming happens. It may be the very tool by which the dreaming brain does its emotional work. And this is where the theories begin to speak to each other rather than against each other. Because what Ravonsuo is describing with threat simulation and what Walker is describing with overnight therapy are not entirely separate things. Both involve the dreaming brain doing something with emotionally significant material, taking it, working it, returning us to it in a state where something can shift. The threat simulation view says the brain is practicing responding to danger. The emotional processing view says the brain is managing the emotional weight of what has already happened. These are not contradictions. They may be two different aspects of the same process. The sleeping brain is not choosing between these tasks. It may be doing both at once, or shifting between them through the course of the night, or serving both with the same machinery from different angles. Ravonsuo's dreamer practices being chased. Walker's dreamer reprocesses the memory of having been caught. The brainstem fires, the prefrontal cortex stays dark, the amygdala runs warm, and the dream unfolds. And something from both directions is accomplished. Let us breathe here. This is a great deal to hold. Take a moment, settle the weight of it, the wiring, the chemistry, the evolutionary story of threat and rehearsal, the quiet nightly work of emotional repair. All of it happening in the same state, in the same hours, in the same dreaming brain. When you are ready, we will continue. There is still more ahead, and some of the most astonishing things are still waiting. What we have not yet addressed is what dreams do with what you have actually lived, not simulated threats or rehearsed fears, but the specific experiences of specific days, the memories you carry, the things you learned, the moments that are already inside you. Because the dreaming brain, it turns out, is also a librarian. A very strange one. A librarian who works at night, in the dark, reorganizing the stacks according to rules that are only beginning to be understood. And some of what has been discovered about this library work is among the most surprising findings that sleep science has produced. But before we go there is one more thing to say about what we have covered tonight in this part of our journey, because it ties together several of the threads. The activation synthesis hypothesis said, random signals from the brainstem, forebrain imposes a story. The threat simulation theory said, the dreaming brain deliberately, through evolution, generates threat scenarios for rehearsal. The emotional processing hypothesis said, the dreaming brain reactivates emotional memories in a low noradrenaline bath to gradually diffuse them. Each of these has something essential to it, but notice what they share. In every case, the dreaming brain is not passive. It is not simply receiving signals and displaying them like a screen. It is doing something with what it has, constructing, selecting, working, rehearsing, processing. The dreaming brain is an active system in the night, following its own agenda with its own logic, serving its own purposes in a state that has been carefully arranged at the level of neurochemistry and anatomy to allow exactly that work to happen. The logic checker is offline so the construction can proceed unchallenged. The stress chemical is quieted so the emotional work can happen without the interference of acute distress. The visual system is running from its own archive so the internal experience is as vivid and immersive as if it were real. All of these are not accidents of sleep. They appear to be design. The dreaming state is not what happens when the brain stops working. It is what happens when the brain shifts to a different kind of work altogether, work it can only do when the ordinary business of waking life has been set aside. That is the picture emerging from the imaging maps and the chemistry and the content analyses, not a mystery wrapped in symbolism, a brain state, a specific, mappable, explicable, elegant brain state, arranged for purposes that are becoming clearer, doing things that matter, things that no one would have expected to find happening in what was once simply called sleep. And there is still the question of memory. Still the question of why the dream vanishes the moment you reach for it. Still the extraordinary fact of the amnesiac who cannot remember sitting down to play a game and who still dreams of the falling, rotating blocks, those are waiting just ahead, and we will reach them gently one step further into the quiet dark. So let us begin with the question that comes so naturally from the map we have been drawing. If the dreaming brain is arranged to do specific work, if the logic checker is offline, the stress chemical quieted, the visual archive running on its own, what precisely is that work? What is the brain actually doing with all this carefully arranged permission? We have two more territories to cross tonight before we reach the question of memory and forgetting. Two theories that look at first glance like rivals, and by the time we are through with them, you may find they are not rivals at all. Take a slow breath. Let yourself settle a little more deeply into wherever you are. There is no hurry here. The night is long and the science is patient. Let us begin with the most common dream on Earth. Not flying, not falling in love, not arriving somewhere and realizing you have forgotten something important. The most common dream theme documented across cultures, across ages, across decades of careful content analysis is this: someone or something is after you. You are running or trying to run. You are in danger. The threat is real inside the dream, as real as anything you have ever felt, and you cannot quite escape it. Almost everyone listening knows this dream. The particular flavor varies. Sometimes it is a person, sometimes something harder to name. Sometimes you cannot see what is behind you, only feel it. The urgency is animal and absolute. For most of the 20th century, this was treated as a psychological curiosity at best, grist for interpretation at worst. What does the pursuer represent? What unconscious conflict does the chase enact? The symbolism industry had answers. Science, largely, did not. And then, in the year 2000, a Finnish cognitive neuroscientist named Antti Revonsuo published a paper in the journal Behavioral and Brain Sciences that offered a different kind of answer entirely. Not symbolic, functional, biological. The paper proposed what Revonsuo called the threat simulation theory. The argument goes something like this. Consider what a dream actually is from an engineering standpoint. It is an immersive, fully embodied simulation of experience. Inside the dream, your heart rate changes, your breathing shifts, your muscles receive signals, your emotional systems engage as if what is happening is real. It is, neurologically speaking, a rehearsal space, a simulator, and simulators have a purpose. Revonsuo pointed out something that once you hear it is difficult to unhear. If you look at large databases of dream reports, thousands and thousands of dreams collected in sleep laboratories over decades, what you find is that threatening events are not merely present. They are massively, consistently, globally overrepresented compared to the dreamer's actual waking life. Think about your own waking days. How often are you genuinely physically threatened? How often are you chased? How often do you face the prospect of serious violence or imminent bodily danger? For most people in ordinary circumstances, the answer is rarely, perhaps occasionally, across a lifetime. And yet in the dream world, threat is the weather. It is the climate. Being attacked or chased appears far more often than friendly encounters. The dreamer is more often the target than the aggressor. Danger comes in proportions that no waking day could justify. This is not noise, this is a signal. Revonsuo's proposal was that this overrepresentation is not accidental and not merely a quirk of dream psychology. It is a designed feature. The dreaming brain, he argued, is running a biological simulation program whose primary ancient purpose was threat rehearsal. Every night, across millions of years of mammalian and human evolution, the dreaming brain was running its subjects through scenarios of danger, giving them a chance to practice recognition, response, and survival, all in a risk-free arena where no real predator could reach them. You practice the chase, you practice the fear, you practice the choices that follow. And in the morning, when the waking world presents a real version of those challenges, you have already run the pattern, not consciously, not deliberately, but your nervous system has been through something like it. The pathways have been activated. The responses have been rehearsed. This is the dream as a flight simulator, not a flight simulator for aircraft, a flight simulator for the whole terrifying business of being a mortal creature in a world that sometimes wants to eat you. The evidence Revonsuo assembled to support this was not just the content statistics, striking as those are. He also pointed to a more pointed kind of data. Studies looking at children who were exposed to genuinely threatening real-world environments. Children who had experienced trauma, real danger, the kind of circumstances that press the waking threat response into continuous activation, showed something consistent. Those children had more threat simulation content in their dreams than children who had grown up in safer circumstances, not less, more. The system, apparently, ramps up the rehearsal when the waking environment signals that it is needed. Think about what that means and what it does not mean. It does not mean the dreams are healing the trauma in those children, not necessarily, not in the way we might wish, but it does suggest that the dreaming system is reading the waking world and responding to it, calibrating its simulation load to the actual danger level of the environment in which the dreamer is living. The simulator runs harder when the threat level is real. Now, there are challenges to this theory, as there are challenges to all theories at the frontier of sleep science. Revonsuo himself was careful to frame TST as a hypothesis rather than a settled mechanism. Some researchers have argued that the content analyses are consistent with the theory but do not prove it, that other explanations could account for the same data. Some have asked whether the rehearsal, even if real, actually transfers to waking performance in ways that could be demonstrated. These are live debates, and they matter, and they remain unresolved. But there is something worth sitting with here before we move on. Whether the specific evolutionary story Revonsuo tells is exactly right in every detail or not, what his work established is hard to dismiss. The dreaming brain is not generating random content with a roughly equal distribution of pleasant and threatening scenarios. It is systematically producing threat, night after night, worldwide, across all available content analyses. Something in the dreaming system has a strong bias toward exactly the kind of experience that, in waking life, would require the most urgent and adaptive response. That is not what a random generator looks like. That looks like a purpose. A few years after the original threat simulation theory, Revonsuo and his colleagues, including Tuula Tuominen and Katja Valli, extended the framework into what they called social simulation theory. The proposal, published around 2015, was that the bias in dream content goes beyond physical threat to encompass the full range of social challenges. Dreams, in this extended view, also rehearse the complex interpersonal world. The negotiations, the conflicts, the alliances, the moments of betrayal or trust that define life in a social species. We practice the social threats as well as the physical ones. This extension is less tested than the original threat theory and carries more uncertainty, but it fits within the same functional logic. The simulator runs social scenarios because social scenarios are also, in their way, survival critical for a creature as deeply social as a human being. Let us pause here for a moment. Take another slow breath. Let the idea settle. You have been chased in your dreams, perhaps many times, and now there is a frame for it, not a symbol to decode, a simulator doing its ancient work. When you are ready, we will continue. The night is holding you gently. This science is not alarming. It is, in its quiet way, reassuring. The brain is not failing when it frightens you in the dark. The brain may be, in a very old and very patient way, preparing you. Now let us cross into the second territory. We stay inside the dreaming brain, inside REM, but we shift our angle, because the threat simulator is not the only framework that emerged from careful science to make sense of what this particular brain state is doing. And the second framework is one that many people find, when they encounter it, almost unbearably apt. It puts words on something most of us have felt without ever having language for it. Have you ever noticed that some memories that were once painful, events that once made you flinch to think about, have softened over time? Not vanished, not forgotten. The memory is still there, accurate, complete. But the sting is different, the rawness is gone. The wound is still visible, but it has been somehow changed by something. Many people chalk this up to the passage of time in a general sense. Time heals, the saying goes, though that formulation is frustratingly vague. What is time doing specifically? Why does the passage of calendar days change the emotional temperature of a memory? Matthew Walker and his colleagues have proposed an answer. And the answer, when it arrived, was night. The answer was sleep. And specifically, it was REM. Walker's hypothesis, sometimes called the overnight therapy hypothesis, though that name is almost too gentle for what the data suggests, goes like this. During REM sleep, the brain reactivates emotional memories. It brings them back up, replays their content, processes their significance, but it does this in a very particular chemical environment. Specifically, it does this in a brain that has switched off its noradrenaline. The stress chemical, as we explored earlier, goes nearly silent during REM. The aminergic systems quiet down. The brain is flooded instead with acetylcholine, which favors loose association and emotional engagement, but in the relative absence of the chemistry of acute stress. What Walker proposes is that this is not incidental. The combination, reactivating an emotional memory, while the brain is bathed in a state low in the chemical that generates the felt sense of stress and urgency, allows the memory to be replayed and reprocessed without the full biological weight of the original distress. The emotion is present, the content is there. But the adrenaline equivalent of the memory, so to speak, has been attenuated, and each replay in this chemistry further softens it. Gradually, over nights, the brain decouples the memory from its most intense arousal signature. You remember what happened. You remember it clearly, but you carry it differently. This is, he argues, what time actually does, not time in the abstract. Sleep. Specifically REM sleep, night after night, quietly defusing the emotional charge from the memories that carry charge, while leaving the memories themselves intact. There is experimental support for this, and it is worth knowing what that support looks like. In studies, subjects were shown emotionally evocative images, things that provoked a genuine emotional reaction. Their responses were measured. Then half the subjects slept with access to normal REM, and half remained awake across the same time interval. When they returned and were shown the same images again, those who had slept showed reduced reactivity. Their amygdala response, measured in the scanner, was lower on the second exposure. Their subjective reports of distress were lower. The images had not changed. The interval was the same. The difference was sleep. Sleep, specifically, took the sting out. Now you might be wondering, not unreasonably, whether this process can fail. whether something can go wrong with the overnight therapy? And the answer, unfortunately, is yes. And the failure mode is one that will be immediately recognizable to anyone who has encountered it or who carries it. In post-traumatic stress disorder, one of the most consistent features is disrupted REM sleep and a particular, devastating kind of dream. Not the generalized threat simulation of normal dreaming, where the scenario is threatening but somewhat fluid and often symbolic. In PTSD nightmares, the traumatic memory often replays with a terrible fidelity. The same event, or something very close to it, recurring night after night, not defused, not softened, replayed. The overnight therapy, for reasons that are not yet fully understood, appears to fail in PTSD. The emotional charge is not discharged. The memory is reactivated night after night in a system that cannot complete the diffusing process. Whether this is because the trauma itself is so overwhelming that the noradrenaline system cannot fully quiet, or because there is something about the nature of traumatic memory encoding that makes it resistant to the normal diffusion process, or some combination. These are still open questions, but the phenomenology is consistent. The mechanism that should ordinarily be stripping the rawness from painful memory is stuck in a loop. There is a drug called prazosin. It is an alpha blocker originally developed for blood pressure. What prazosin does, among other things, is reduce the activity of the noradrenergic signaling system in the brain. And some researchers and clinicians have explored it specifically for PTSD nightmares on the basis of this mechanistic rationale. If excess noradrenaline activity during REM is part of what prevents the overnight diffusion from working, then quieting that system pharmacologically might allow the process to proceed. Some studies have shown reductions in nightmare frequency and severity with prazosin. Others have shown mixed results across trials, and the picture is not simple. Prazosin is not a cure for PTSD. The mechanism is not proven to be exactly the one proposed. But the fact that an intervention targeting noradrenergic signaling shows any effect at all on dream distress in trauma is another thread in the same fabric. The chemistry of the dreaming brain and the chemistry of emotional healing are not parallel stories. They may be the same story. Let us sit with that for a moment. There is something quietly moving about this if you allow yourself to feel it rather than simply understand it. The idea that sleep, ordinary sleep, is in part a nightly emotional maintenance program, that the brain, while you lie still and seemingly absent, is tending to you, taking the day's difficulties and the older griefs you carry and working on them gently in the dark, decoupling the memory from the worst of its weight, sorting what needs sorting, so that in the morning you are a slightly different, slightly lighter version of the person who went to bed. Not always, not perfectly, but as a general pattern across nights, across years, this appears to be something the REM brain is doing. And what does this have to do with threat simulation? Are these two theories, Revonsuo's flight simulator and Walker's overnight therapy, pointing in opposite directions? Are they asking us to choose between them? We are almost at the place where this question answers itself, but let us hold it a little longer because the holding is part of what makes the answer satisfying. Take a slow breath. Let the night wrap itself around you. You have been listening for some time now, and you may already feel some of this working on you, the slow relaxation that comes from being in the presence of ideas that are large and patient. There is no urgency here. We will take the next step in our own time. When you are ready, continue with me. Here is the thing about threat simulation and emotional processing as theories of dreaming. They look like rivals if you frame the question as a single-answer question. Why do we dream? Pick one. The flight simulator or the therapy room. But the brain is not a system that generally does one thing, and the dreaming state, with this specific, carefully arranged brain state with its logic offline and its emotion online and its chemistry tuned, is not a narrow tool. It is, in some sense, a condition. a condition that different systems can use for different purposes, and there is nothing preventing threat rehearsal and emotional diffusion from happening simultaneously in the same night, in the same dream, perhaps in the same moment. Consider what happens in a typical threatening dream, the chaste dream we began with. You are running, the fear is real biologically, your amygdala is active, as we have seen in the imaging, and then, at some point, the dream ends, and eventually the night does too, and you wake. And something has happened. Something was activated and then gradually, in the chemistry of REM, allowed to run its course and settle. Not resolved in a narrative sense, but metabolized in a physiological one. Perhaps the flight simulator and the overnight therapy are the same process observed from two different angles. The simulator rehearses the threat, and the chemistry of the state in which the simulator runs means that the very act of rehearsing, in this particular chemical bath, also does the emotional work. One state, two jobs, perhaps more than two. Alan Brown, Pierre McKay, and the imaging researchers showed us the map of what lights up during REM. The emotional structures, the memory structures, the limbic and paralimbic core of the brain, all engaged. The logic checker, dark. That map does not say threat simulation only. It does not say emotional processing only. It says a state that is exquisitely arranged for emotional, memory-laden, loosely associative processing, for doing something with the material of experience in the absence of the critical faculty that would otherwise constrain and judge it. What jobs get done in that state? Probably several, and they are probably not separate programs running in sequence, but overlapping processes that use the same architecture for complementary ends. This is not a vague, we don't know conclusion. It is, if anything, a more sophisticated one than picking a single winner. The dreaming brain is not a single-purpose tool. It is a multifunction condition, and the question of what it is for has multiple true answers, none of which cancels the others. Antti Revonsuo's threat simulator and Matthew Walker's overnight therapy room are not competing explanations. They are both observing true things about what happens in the same space. There is a word in science for when two phenomena that seemed like rivals turn out to be complementary views of the same underlying process. The word is consilience. And there is something almost aesthetically satisfying about finding it here, in the science of dreams, in the territory that has been called mysterious for so long. Not mystery, architecture. A specific, elegant, multi-purpose architecture running every night in the hundreds of millions of sleeping humans across the world, doing work that is neither random nor meaningless, work that traces back to the oldest parts of the mammalian brain, work that you can begin to feel the outline of when you let yourself think about your own dreams, your own recurring themes, your own experience of waking up from something difficult and finding, over time, that it has somehow changed. Take a breath. Let that settle. We have resolved the two great questions that opened this section. Why are you so often chased in your dreams? Because the simulator is running. Because the dreaming brain has a strong, global, cross-cultural bias toward threat content, and that bias appears to be functional. Revonsuo's work is not the final word, but it is a serious scientific proposal backed by real data, and it makes better sense of the content we find than any alternative theory offered so far. And why do painful memories sometimes soften over nights and weeks, not just years? Because the overnight therapy appears to be real, because REM provides a chemical environment, low noradrenaline, high acetylcholine, in which emotional memories can be reactivated and reprocessed with attenuated distress. Because sleep, specifically, shows up in the experiments as the mechanism by which this softening occurs. Not time in the abstract, not distraction. Sleep. And these two things are not in tension. They are, quite likely, the same state doing multiple jobs that its architecture happens to be well suited for. We are not finished. There is still the question of memory, not just memory's role in feeding dream content, but the extraordinary things that have been discovered about what sleep does to memory and why the dream vanishes so reliably the moment you try to hold it. There is still Robert Stickgold and the Tetris study, and the amnesiacs who saw falling blocks in the dark without knowing why. There is still the dedicated population of neurons whose apparent job is to erase your dreams before morning. Those are waiting just ahead. The night is still here. So are you, and we will reach all of it, slowly, in the quiet that belongs to this hour. One more breath, one more moment of stillness, and then we will continue, deeper still, into everything the sleeping mind carries and does. And eventually, so deliberately and precisely, let's go. There is a Finnish cognitive neuroscientist named Antti Revonsuo, and in the year 2000 he published a paper in the journal Behavioral and Brain Sciences that asked a question most sleep researchers had been moving around rather than directly toward. Not what happens during dreams, not what the brain looks like during dreaming, but why? Why, of all the things an unconscious brain could do during 8 hours of vulnerability in the dark, would it so consistently generate scenarios of threat? Because that is what it does. When you survey large databases of dream reports, thousands of them collected across different cultures and different decades, ordinary people writing down what they encountered in the night, a pattern emerges that is difficult to explain away. Threatening events are not merely present in dreams, they are massively overrepresented far beyond what you would expect if dreams simply mirrored the proportions of waking life. Aggressive and threatening interactions appear more often than friendly ones. Being chased, attacked, falling, trapped, endangered. These are among the most common dream themes across the world. And in these scenarios, the dreamer is far more often the target than the aggressor. We do not dream primarily of picnics, we dream primarily of danger. Revonsuo's explanation was precise. He proposed what he called threat simulation theory. The claim was this: dreaming is an evolved biological defense mechanism, a kind of offline rehearsal system that repeatedly simulates threatening situations so that the ancestral human nervous system could practice, without consequence, recognizing danger and responding to it. A flight simulator for survival. The brain, during REM, is running scenarios, not randomly, not meaninglessly. It is running the scenarios that mattered most to organisms trying not to be eaten, not to be ambushed, not to fall from a height, not to be driven from the group. If that strikes you as speculation, consider what the evidence looks like when you go looking for it in the population where the theory makes the strongest prediction. If threat simulation ramps up when the waking environment is genuinely dangerous, then children living in real danger should show more threat content in their dreams than children living in safety, and they do. Studies of traumatized children, children in environments where threat was real and recurring, showed more threat simulation content in their dreams than children in comparable circumstances who had not been exposed to the same dangers. The system apparently responds to the environment. When waking life is more dangerous, the simulator runs more scenarios. The social simulation theory, extended by Revonsuo together with Tuominen and Valli around 2015, carries this a step further. Physical threats, they proposed, are not the only thing the social primate brain needs to rehearse. The complex social world, navigating relationships, alliances, conflicts, status, rejection, is itself a domain in which rehearsal might confer advantage. Dreams in this extension may also serve to practice the social landscape, to run through the scenarios that shape belonging and exclusion and trust. This theory is less tested than the original threat simulation proposal, and it remains more tentative, but it fits the observation that dream content, when you look closely at it, is saturated with social interaction, not just danger, but people, and the complicated things that happen between them. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a slow, deep breath. Let the air come in without effort, and let it go again the same way. If your body has grown heavier against whatever it rests on, let that heaviness be welcome. You do not need to follow every thread precisely. Let the ideas move through you like water. We will continue when you are ready. The question of what dreams are for does not end with threat simulation. There is a second body of work built across different laboratories and from a different angle that arrives at a complementary answer. And this one is easier to feel because you have probably noticed it yourself. You wake from a dream about something painful. The dream has visited the thing, the loss, the failure, the conversation you have replayed 100 times. And when you surface into morning, the ache is there, but it is sometimes softer, not healed, not gone, but softer, less raw, as though the night has done something to it that waking thought could not. Matthew Walker and his colleagues have proposed that this is not your imagination. The hypothesis is called overnight therapy, and its mechanism is the same neurochemical fact we have already met. During REM sleep, noradrenaline, the brain's primary stress and arousal chemical, falls to its lowest level in the entire 24-hour cycle. The aminergic systems that normally maintain alertness and emotional reactivity go nearly quiet. The brain during REM is, in Walker's phrase, bathed in a chemical environment largely free of noradrenaline, and it is precisely in this low noradrenaline state that emotional memories are reactivated. The proposal is elegant in its logic. When you reactivate an emotional memory in waking life, noradrenaline is present. The memory arrives with its charge intact, sometimes with additional charge layered on by the retrieval itself. But during REM, the memory can be revisited in a brain that is not flooded with stress chemistry. The experience is replayed in some form, but the physiological context is different. And over repeated cycles of this, across one night, across many nights, the emotional weight attached to the memory may gradually decrease while the memory itself is preserved. You keep what happened, you lose, slowly, some of the pain of it. The experiments that support this are real. In one, subjects viewed emotionally disturbing images and then either slept, with REM, or remained awake across the same interval. When they later viewed the same images again, those who had slept showed measurably reduced reactivity in the amygdala, the brain's emotional alarm center, and reported less subjective distress on seeing the images a second time. Those who had remained awake showed no equivalent reduction. It was not time that softened the emotional response, it was sleep. Specifically, the REM state, with its specific neurochemistry, doing something to the emotional signature of the stored experience that wakefulness, however extended, could not replicate. This makes the clinical observation in post-traumatic stress disorder devastating in a new way. In PTSD, the nightmare is not merely a symptom, it may be the overnight therapy process failing. The emotional memory is being replayed, that much is intact. But something in the process of discharge is broken. The nightmare visits the trauma repeatedly, across night after night, and each time the dream awakes, not softened but re-traumatized, the noradrenaline system dysregulated, the loop unresolved. The memory comes back as charged as it was, sometimes more so. The drug prazosin, which works by blocking a specific class of noradrenaline receptor, has been used in PTSD patients to reduce nightmare frequency and intensity. The mechanistic logic is clean. If elevated noradrenaline during what should be a low noradrenaline REM state is part of what keeps the process from working, then lowering noradrenaline through medication might allow the process to resume. Clinical trials have shown benefit in some patients, but the results across studies are mixed. The efficacy is not consistent, and it would be inaccurate to present prazosin as a reliable solution. The mechanism is plausible and the rationale is grounded in real neuroscience. The clinical picture is more complicated. What these two theories, threat simulation and overnight therapy share is something important to hold on to before we move further. They are not competing. They are not asking you to choose between them as though one must be wrong if the other is right. Revonsuo's theory describes what the content of dreams rehearses. Walker's hypothesis describes what the neurochemical environment of REM does to the emotional weight of memory. These are questions about different levels of the same state, and the answers fit together rather than colliding. A brain that is, during REM, already reactivating emotional memories in a low-stress chemical bath is exactly the kind of brain that would also run threat simulations in a low-consequence arena. The same architecture serves both functions. The same hour of sleep does both things. This is the shape of what the modern consensus is beginning to look like. Not a verdict, because the debate is genuinely live, but a direction. The competing theories of dreaming are not rivals awaiting a single winner. They may be complementary descriptions of what a single neurological state, with a known chemistry, a known imaging signature, a known pattern of what switches on and what switches off, happens to be well suited to accomplish. The brain during REM is already configured by its own wiring for emotional processing, for memory reactivation, for loosely associative simulation, unchecked by the logic centers. Everything the theories describe may simply be what happens when that configuration runs. We are not finished, but let us pause here, just briefly. Let the breath be slow. Let the weight of the body settle further into wherever it has come to rest. The question of memory has its own layer still waiting. Not just the role of memory in populating dreams, the familiar faces, the places from years ago, the fragments of yesterday woven into something strange, but the deeper question of what sleep does to memory itself, and the remarkable answer to why the dream dissolves so completely in the first seconds after waking, retreating so fast that you reach for it and find only the edge of something already gone. Take a slow breath, and when you are ready, we will continue together. Memory, as it turns out, is not a recording. It never was. The mind does not store experience the way a camera stores an image, a fixed imprint, unchanged, available for retrieval. Memory is a living process. It shifts. It strengthens and weakens. It is edited each time it is touched. And sleep, it turns out, is one of the most important editors it has. The first clue came from rats. In the late 1990s, neuroscientists began placing electrodes in the hippocampi of rats and recording the patterns of neural firing as the animals navigated mazes during the day. Each neuron fired in its own signature pattern as the rat moved. This corner, this stretch of open track, this particular turn. The neurons laid down together, something like a map, written in the language of electrical activity. And then, when the rats were allowed to sleep, something unexpected happened. The same neurons in the same sequences fired again, but faster. The hippocampus was replaying the day's experience at high speed, compressing hours of waking activity into minutes of sleep. The rat was, in some meaningful sense, rerunning the maze it had just run while it slept. This happens in human brains too. During the slow-wave sleep that comes in the earlier part of the night, the deep, quiet, non-REM sleep that is not the dreaming sleep but is not empty either, the hippocampus conducts what researchers describe as a replay. The neural patterns laid down during the day are reactivated, replayed, and in that replay, gradually transferred and stabilized into the neocortex, the vast outer mantle of the brain where long-term memories are eventually stored. The hippocampus is like a temporary holding place, a staging area. Sleep, especially slow-wave sleep, is when the cargo gets properly loaded. But here is where it becomes strange and beautiful. The process is not passive. The sleeping brain does not simply replay everything with equal weight. It selects. it prioritizes, and it can, as researchers discovered, be guided from outside. The technique is called targeted memory reactivation. The method is elegant in its simplicity. While a person is awake, learning a task, a spatial layout, a set of associations, a skill, a particular sound or scent is paired with that learning. Something subtle, the smell of rose, the sound of a soft tone. Then while the person sleeps, that same cue is represented quietly, at low volume, below the threshold of waking. And what the research found is that memory for the task improved. The cue, replayed into the sleeping brain, nudged the hippocampus to prioritize that particular memory trace in its overnight replay. The sleeping mind, in effect, was being reminded of what to consolidate. And it listened. This is not a metaphor. The sleeping brain is selectively reprocessing specific memories, and the reprocessing can be nudged from outside the skull by a whisper of a sound that the waking mind would barely notice. The fact that this works at all says something profound about the nature of memory consolidation during sleep. It is not random, not passive, not simply the whole day playing back in compressed form. It is curated. The brain chooses, by some mechanism not yet fully understood, what to keep and what to let go, what to strengthen and what to allow to fade. And then there is the dream lag effect. You might expect, if sleep consolidates memory, that the memories appearing in dreams would be fresh, the events of the previous day showing up in altered form that night. And this happens. Researchers call it the day residue effect, and it is real. Fragments of waking experience often surface in dreams the following night, a detail from a conversation, the face of someone encountered that afternoon, the layout of a building visited recently. The ordinary world seeps into the dream world in pieces reassembled into something unfamiliar. But Tore Nielsen and colleagues documented a second pattern that is stranger and less expected. There is a second peak of memory appearance in dreams, not the night after an experience, but roughly 5 to 7 days later. An event happens on a Monday. Elements of it appear in some form in dreams on Sunday. This is what researchers call the dream lag effect. The delayed reappearance suggests that memory consolidation is not a single overnight process, but something that unfolds in cycles, returning to the same material in stages, deepening the encoding over a span of days rather than a single sleep. The mind revisits what it is integrating, slowly, circularly, the way water works its way into stone. And now we come to Robert Stickgold and to Tetris. Stickgold, working at Harvard, gave a group of people Tetris to play, many hours of it. The rotating blocks, the falling pieces, the building pressure of a game that occupies the visual cortex and the hands and the spatial planning systems all at once. Then he let them sleep. And as they drifted into that early hypnagogic state, the blurry threshold between waking and sleep, many of them reported seeing the blocks, falling, rotating. The game, in some form, had followed them into the approach to sleep. This alone would have been interesting. But Stickgold had also included in his study a group of dense amnesiacs, people with severe damage to the hippocampus, the very structure most critical to forming new, explicit, declarative memories. These were people who could not tell you upon waking the next morning that they had ever played Tetris. They had no conscious recollection of sitting down at the game, no memory of the task. The explicit record was simply absent. And yet, as they fell asleep, they too reported the blocks, falling, rotating. The imagery from a game they could not consciously remember playing had still found its way into the threshold of their sleep. What this suggests is genuinely startling. The memory systems that feed into dream imagery are not identical to the memory systems that feed into conscious recall. The amnesiacs could not retrieve the experience through the normal channels of explicit memory, but something had been recorded at another level, in some other form, procedural, perceptual, implicit, and that something surfaced in sleep imagery even when the conscious record had not been made. Dreams can incorporate experiences that the waking mind has no access to. The filing system for dreams draws from deeper archives, ones we cannot open with ordinary remembering. And when dreams do draw on memory, they do not replay it whole. This is one of the most consistent findings in dream content research. Only a small fraction of dreams contain what researchers would call a faithful, complete replay of a specific waking episode. What the dreaming brain does overwhelmingly is take fragments: a face from one context, a room from another, a feeling associated with something from years ago placed in a situation from last week. The dream remixes, it recombines. It splices the emotional residue of one memory onto the physical scene of another, produces hybrids, generates composites, follows associative threads that logic would never permit, but that emotion seems to authorize entirely. The brain during dreaming is not an archivist. It is, in the richest possible sense, an editor, cutting, reassembling, following something other than chronological sequence. This is the memory feeding into dreams precisely, not replay, not retrieval, but recombination. Fragments of the lived world dissolved and reconstituted into the strange coherence of dream logic. Let us rest for a moment here. Take a slow breath. Notice the quiet around the body, the weight, the ease of it. When you are ready, we will continue, and we will come, at last, to the question of forgetting. Because here is what most people feel. The morning after a dream that felt vivid and real and full. They reach for it, and it is already leaving. The edges dissolve first, then the middle. Within minutes, sometimes within seconds of sitting up, the dream is gone, not suppressed, not hidden somewhere waiting to be found, but genuinely absent, as if it had never been. And there is something almost maddening about this, because the dream felt, in the moment, as real as anything that has ever happened, as emotionally present as any waking experience. And then it is simply not there. The vanishing is not a failure, it is not a glitch. It is chemically designed. Memory, the kind that persists, the kind that builds a lasting record in the brain, depends on a chemical called noradrenaline, sometimes called norepinephrine. This chemical is one of the brain's key neuromodulators, a signal that helps strengthen synaptic connections, consolidates new information, and essentially tells the brain, this is worth keeping. Without it, memory encoding falters. The filing does not complete, and noradrenaline during REM sleep is precisely what the brain turns off. We came to this fact earlier in the context of bizarreness, how the collapse of the aminergic system and the surge of acetylcholine creates the loose, associative, unchecked quality of dream experience. But it has a second consequence, just as important. When noradrenaline goes silent, the brain is not merely freed from its own editorial judgment. It is also stripped of the primary chemical it uses to write new memories into long-term storage. The dreaming brain is experiencing intensely, emotionally, visually, in a chemical state that is constitutionally resistant to encoding. The moment is happening. The system for recording the moment is switched off. This is why the dream fades. Not because dreams are unimportant, but because the architecture of dreaming includes, as a designed feature, the suppression of the very mechanism that would let you keep it. Think of it this way. Imagine you are writing something down and someone comes behind you and quietly lifts the pen from your hand. You keep speaking, the ideas keep coming, but nothing is being committed to paper. Then you finish and reach back to read what you have written, and the page is empty. That is the relationship between dreaming and remembering. The experience runs, the encoding does not follow. and it may go even further than that. In 2019, researchers including Shoizawa and colleagues published a study in the journal Science that pointed towards something more active still. They identified a population of neurons in the hypothalamus that produce a chemical called melanin-concentrating hormone, MCH neurons. These neurons are active during REM sleep, and what the researchers found was that they appear to suppress hippocampal memory storage. When the MCH neurons were artificially activated in mice, the animals remembered less. When they were silenced, memory improved. The neurons were not simply passive, they seemed to constitute something like an active erase signal, a dedicated circuit whose function, during REM sleep, is to prevent the sleeping brain from storing what is happening as though it were real. Why would the brain do this? The proposed answer has its own quiet logic. You dream of things that never happened, people who have not existed, places you have never been, events that are physically impossible. If the brain retained all of this with the same fidelity that it retains real experience, the waking mind would be flooded with false memories indistinguishable from true ones. The filing system would be corrupted. The MCH neurons, in this view, are the brain's own fact-checker operating at the level of storage, ensuring that the dream, whatever function it serves while it runs, does not contaminate the archive of the real world. The very strangeness of dreams, which would make them dangerous if preserved, is rendered harmless by their erasure. You forget your dreams not because they are meaningless, but because remembering them with full fidelity would undermine the coherence of your memory of reality. The system is designed at some deep level to let them go. There is one more piece to the forgetting. You are most likely to remember the dream that was happening immediately before you woke. This is why, as we noted earlier, the dream you carry into morning is almost always the last one. Most of your REM sleep, the richest, longest, most vivid periods of dreaming, comes near morning in the final hours before rising. The 90-minute sleep cycles that repeat through the night grow progressively richer in REM as the night goes on. The first cycle has very little. The last cycle, near dawn, may be almost entirely REM. And a dream can only make it into waking memory if you surface, either briefly or fully, during or immediately after that dream state, while the trace is still available at the threshold. Wake from deep non-REM sleep in the middle of the night, and you will report almost nothing. A vague sense of thinking, perhaps, a texture, not a story. But wake from the long REM stretch near morning, and there is a chance, not a guarantee, but a chance, that you catch the tail of something before the noradrenaline comes back online and the ordinary world reasserts itself. Even then, the catching requires something like intention. The dream fades faster than almost anything else the mind can experience. Researchers who study dream recall have found that the act of staying still, of not immediately sitting up or checking a phone, of giving the dream a few seconds of quiet attention before moving, significantly increases how much of it survives into waking. The fading is rapid, but not instantaneous. There is a brief window, and what you do in that window, whether you reach toward the dream or immediately turn toward the day, largely determines what you keep. Let us take another slow breath. And when you are settled, there is one more thing. Something that changes the picture of dreaming entirely. Everything we have talked about assumes that the dreaming brain is a sealed system, a closed theatre, running its private performance behind a curtain that waking science cannot part. And for most of the history of dream research, that was essentially true. You could study sleep from outside the skull, you could read brain scans, you could wake a sleeper and ask what they had been experiencing, but you could not reach in. You could not communicate in real time with a mind inside a dream. And then you could. Lucid dreaming is the state in which a dreamer becomes aware, while dreaming, that they are dreaming. This happens naturally to many people, usually in the long REM stretches near morning, and with practice, some people can induce it deliberately. What makes lucid dreaming remarkable to neuroscience is what it implies. In the lucid state, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, that same region whose deactivation produces the bizarre, uncritical, logically untethered quality of ordinary dreams, partially comes back online. The executive system rouses just a little. Logic re-enters the dream. The dreamer can think, "I am in a dream, this is not real." And then, sometimes, they can act on that thought. In landmark early studies of lucid dreaming, researchers established a way of communicating with dreamers from the inside. The eyes, as we noted much earlier in this conversation, are one of the few parts of the body not paralyzed during REM. The voluntary eye muscles are exempt from the atonia that holds the rest of the skeleton still. So researchers worked with experienced lucid dreamers before sleep, teaching them a code. If you become lucid, signal us with a specific pattern of eye movements. Left, right, a Morse code in the only channel still open between the dreaming mind and the world. And in the sleep laboratory, the researchers waited, and the signal came. The EEG confirmed REM. The dreamer was asleep, deeply in a dream, and their eyes moved. Left, right. The pre-agreed pattern. A mind inside a dream, reaching out. In 2021, work published by multiple independent research groups, working in France, Germany, the Netherlands, and the United States, went further still. They asked sleeping, lucid dreamers simple questions, arithmetic problems. What is 8 minus 6? And the dreamers, from inside the dream, signaled answers using their eyes and small facial muscle movements. They got the questions right. One person later described the experience from inside. They had been in the midst of a dream, became aware it was a dream, then perceived a voice asking a question, and understood that the voice was coming from outside the dream, from the researchers. They answered, "From inside the dream." This is not a metaphor or a thought experiment. It happened in controlled conditions with EEG confirmation and pre-agreed signal protocols, a two-way communication between a waking researcher and a sleeping, dreaming brain. The curtain, just briefly, was parted. The sealed theatre turned out to have a very small door, and someone knocked, and the dreamer knocked back. What this tells us is layered. It tells us that conscious, intentional thought is possible inside a dream, that the prefrontal cortex, even partially reactivated, can support something like rational response. It tells us that the boundary between dreaming and waking is not absolute, but a gradient, a spectrum of states, and that some forms of waking awareness can coexist with the dreaming brain. And it opens the possibility, still largely unexplored, that lucid dreaming could eventually become a tool for understanding consciousness itself, a laboratory that exists not in any building, but inside the sleeping human mind. Take one more slow breath. Let the body be easy. The night has run its course. Let us come, quietly, to the close. We began tonight with a switch. One switch flipping in the brain every night, with consequences that reach across your entire inner life. The dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, the seat of logic and self-monitoring and reality checking, going quiet. The amygdala and hippocampus and anterior cingulate lighting up. Noradrenaline withdrawing. Acetylcholine flooding in. A specific, mappable, chemically precise brain state, recognizable on a scan, replicable in a laboratory, ancient in its evolutionary roots. And from that one switch came everything. The imagery generated internally, top-down from stored material, because the primary visual cortex sleeps, while the higher visual systems run on memories and associations. The bizarreness of dreams, the impossible scene shifts, the morphing faces, the settings that change without transition, because the prefrontal critic is off and the emotional associative engine runs unchecked. The emotional intensity, because the amygdala is active and warm, and the fear and longing and grief you carry move freely through a brain that has temporarily stopped trying to moderate them. The forgetting, because the very chemical that encodes memory is deliberately withdrawn, and a small population of neurons in the hypothalamus may be actively ensuring that the dream's fictions do not contaminate the real archive. And through all of this, threaded through the strangeness and the forgetting and the vivid, impossible feeling of it all, the brain was doing something. Several things, perhaps, all at once. It was rehearsing, running its threat simulator, populating the dream world with the kinds of danger that a human body in a dangerous environment might need to recognize and survive. Not because your bedroom is dangerous, but because the machinery was built across millions of years for a world that was, the ancient survival code, still running. It was processing, taking the emotional residue of waking experience and reactivating it in a bath of chemistry stripped of stress hormones, giving the emotional memory a chance to be encoded without the charge, so that you wake knowing what happened but no longer roar about it in the same way. The overnight therapist working quietly without being asked. It was consolidating, replaying the patterns of the day into long-term storage, selecting and strengthening, building the architecture of who you will know and what you will remember. The hippocampus replaying, the neocortex receiving, the slowly deepening integration of experience into the person you are becoming. And perhaps it was doing something else still. Something the default mode network lines of research are beginning to suggest. Practicing the loosely associative, generative, creative mode of thinking that makes connection between distant ideas possible. The dreaming brain as the far end of a spectrum of spontaneous cognition, unconstrained by external input, free to follow any thread, combine any fragments, arrive at any configuration, most of which will dissolve with the morning, but some of which, in some people on some nights, surfaces as something new. These are not four rival theories waiting for one to be eliminated. They are four descriptions of what a single brain state, one with a known chemistry and a known imaging signature, happens to be configured to do. The activation synthesis hypothesis and the threat simulation theory and the overnight therapy model and the memory consolidation framework are not in conflict. They are accounts of different uses of the same architecture. The question is not which one is correct. The question is how much of the dream's work we have managed so far to see. The honest answer, the satisfying one, the one that respects both the science and your curiosity. We know a very great deal about how dreaming works. The wiring diagram is largely drawn, the chemistry is mapped, the imaging studies have shown us in vivid detail what is on and what is off, and we are closing in steadily on why, on what functions this ancient, conserved, nightly state was built to serve. The answer, as it currently stands, appears to be several things at once, all of them oriented towards survival and flourishing in one form or another. This is not a mystery that has simply been deferred. It is a question that is being answered layer by layer by people sitting in darkened laboratories next to sleeping strangers, reading the language of the dreaming brain, one slow signal at a time. And here is something simple that often gets lost in the science. Everyone with normal REM sleep dreams, everyone. The people who say with confidence that they never dream, they dream. The sleep lab, when it wakes them in the night, reliably finds them mid-experience, able to describe something, sometimes startled to discover that the blank dark of their sleep was not blank at all. To say I never dream is almost always to say I never remember my dreams. The difference matters. The dreams are there. The recall is simply what the noradrenaline did not get to complete, which means that you tonight, lying in the quiet wherever you have found it, will dream. The cycles are already beginning to organize themselves, or will be soon, following the rhythm that a body keeps without any instruction from the waking mind. The earlier hours will lean toward depth, slow wave, restoration. Later, the balance will shift, the REM periods will grow longer, the dreaming richer and stranger and more vivid. Near morning, in the long quiet before waking, something will be running, a simulation, a rehearsal, a processing, a consolidation, ancient machinery doing several things at once. Let that be enough to know tonight. Not everything. Not the final answer, which has not yet been fully written, but the shape of it. The outline of what science has so far managed to see through the darkness of the sleeping skull. A brain not resting but working in its own specific and well-documented way, generating, replaying, erasing, connecting, making the strange coherence that you will almost certainly not remember tomorrow morning, and that your brain will by then have already completed. The dream that is coming for you tonight has been shaped by everything that occupied you today. The faces you saw, the things that worried you quietly, the sounds and textures and small emotional residues of an ordinary day. They will be dissolved and recombined by a brain whose logic is temporarily offline and whose emotions are running unguarded and warm. You will probably not remember what happens. Something will be processed regardless. Something will be strengthened. Something perhaps will be let go. This is what the science, imperfect and still unfinished and genuinely honest about what it does not yet know, has found in the decades since Eugene Aserinsky noticed his sleeping son's eyes moving beneath their lids in a laboratory at the University of Chicago in 1953 and understood that something was happening in there worth paying attention to. Something was happening in there. It still is, if you find yourself noticing some morning the tail end of a dream, that last fragment before the day takes over. We would love to know. Share it, or share simply what time it is and where you are listening from. There is something quietly lovely about knowing where in the world people are sleeping. There is no need to understand any of it further tonight. The science is there, patient, waiting for morning and curiosity and the ordinary light of a waking mind. Tonight, it is enough to close your eyes and let the machinery do what it knows how to do. You are moored safe in the sleepy harbor now. Drift off.